If you have been following my content for any time in the past year, then you've been hearing me talk about relocating the OEM PCV system on the 3-liter supercharged engines. So if that's something that you want more information about, you want to see what it takes to actually do, this is the video. Stick around and I will show you how to do this. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Cameron, this is Audi C7 owners, and if you're watching this video, you want to know what it takes to relocate your 3-liter supercharged engine's PCV system. This is specific to the CTUB engine codes, so this is pre-facelift Audi A6s, A7s, and all your B8, B8.5, S4s, SQ5s. The CREC engine, CREC engine codes, the ones with the multi-port injection, we haven't verified if this will work. We think it will, but until someone tries it, we won't know. So I want to go over a few things. I know that you guys want to jump into the DIY, and a lot of you will skip ahead at this point, but if you're serious about doing this, please watch everything because there's a lot of information that's really important to know. I'm going to really quickly cover why we're doing this, what's wrong with our OEM PCV system, what PCV system we're doing. I'm going to talk about those things, and I'm going to talk about some other things that might pertain to you if you're watching this video a year from when it was posted, because there will likely be some different things going forward that happen with this. Okay, first off, let's talk about what's wrong with the OEM PCV system. So the big thing is that when this fails, and I've got mine right here, your diaphragm, which is located here on that part of underneath this cap on your OEM PCV, when that fails, you start burning oil. It just starts to push oil into your combustion chamber and you start losing oil. And that's not a huge issue. The biggest problem with that is you're now burning more oil, which is clogging your catalytic converters, which are already a problem with this. If you don't have cats, it's not a big deal, but it's not good burning oil. You know, Volkswagen Audis are kind of known for it, but it sucks. In order to replace this, if you go to a dealer or a shop, you're looking at anywhere from $1,500 to about $1,800 from parts to labor, which is absurd because the engine, well, I'm sorry, the supercharger has to come off. There's a ton of gaskets you got to replace. There's coolant pipes that could potentially break. There are all sorts of things that can add on costs. The labor itself is about, I don't know what the book labor is, but I know doing it yourself, if you're handy in this engine, can be anywhere from 3 to 5 hours, depending on how handy you are in the engine bay. It's not the easiest. There's some tight fits back there. You got to have some tools that work well for you. So it's not fun at all. If you're doing it yourself, you're looking at spending anywhere from about $400 to $500 in parts to replace everything. So that's the first negative when it comes to your OEM PCV system. The second one is that your OEM PCV is plastic. This whole thing is plastic. And these channels right here are coolant channels. You have engine coolant running through these two lines right here. And the problem with this is these are known to crack, and when they crack, they can mix engine coolant with your engine oil. Obviously, that's bad. That will turn your oil into the forbidden chocolate milk, which can really do a lot of damage to your engine. And there's no indication that that's happening. There's no sensor that will understand that until your coolant level gets too low. And what's also happening there is your coolant is draining out of your reservoir in your coolant system and filling your engine, so you're actually building more volume of liquid in your engine, which can do damage to seals, create too much pressure. So it's just all in all a really, really bad thing. And if you're not on top of paying attention to what's going on in your engine, that can get catastrophic really, really quickly. The other issue, your return line comes off the very top, this little tiny stack here that goes into the bottom of your engine, into the bottom of your supercharger. And a couple things here. One, that's oil vapor going directly from the PCV into your supercharger, which is then going into your intercooler cores in your supercharger. So that's degrading those by clogging them up and reducing the effectiveness of your intercooler cores, which affect your IATs. It's also causing you to burn oil out of that, especially if you have a tuned 3.0T. You're creating a lot more pressure, negative pressure, whatever you want to call it, suction basically, and you are almost using this as a straw, pulling oil out of your PCV and going through your supercharger intercooler cores into your combustion chamber and burning. This can also lead to carbon buildup in your intakes. So there's a lot of negative things about the OEM PCV system. The last negative for some people is that you cannot run an effective catch can system to catch those oil vapors off of this car because there's no way to tap into this return line. You've seen some people run a catch can on these engines, but what they're doing is they're tapping into the spider hoses that connect to your valve covers. And that's useless. Those are already just moving oil vapors from the PCV system into the valve covers and recycling it. You're not doing anything with a catch can attached to that. So that is all the negatives of the OEM PCV system. Now let's talk about what we're doing in terms of replacing it and making it better. Real quick rundown is we're basically replacing our PCV system with a PCV system from a 2006-2007 Audi 3.2 liter engine. The big difference there is that there is a metal valley pan in the bottom of the engine, so your coolant channels will never crack and you won't ever have to worry about coolant mixing with your engine oil again. And the big thing is that your PCV, the actual diaphragm, gets relocated to outside of your engine. So instead of a 3 to 5 hour job and $500 in parts, if your PCV diaphragm fails, it is a 5-minute job by just taking off this cap and swapping out the internals for 20 bucks. So that's the really, really big advantage, or two big advantages there. We're making a more soundproof, when I say soundproof, I'm saying a more reliable system, and then when it does fail, or if it fails, a much easier fix to it. Then another added bonus for some people is the ability to run an effective catch can. Since we're changing our return line, which you'll see in the install video, we can actually run a PCV or run a line from our PCV to a catch can, and then the catch can go back to our return port, and that catch can will pull more of the oil vapors out that the oil separator in the engine doesn't catch. It should pull almost all of those out before returning that air back into your supercharger, thus keeping it cleaner, allowing it to perform better, and you aren't going to be burning as much oil. You're not going to be worried about the supercharger sucking oil out of the PCV anymore. It's just going to be an overall better performing system, a more reliable performing system. So that is what we're doing, and that's why we're doing it. All right, this is a disclaimer for those of you watching this video in the future from when we posted it. At the time of the filming of this video, MercRacing and I worked together to create a kit that allows you to do this job at home 100% DIY without permanently modifying anything. And that kit consists of a plug that goes into the bottom of your supercharger to block that off, and a throttle body spacer that connects between the throttle body and the supercharger to act as a new return line for your PCV system. With all of the feedback from people as we've been going step by step going through this, and me actually doing the install, there is a very high likelihood that in the future we will have a full bolt-on kit, because as of right now in this video, as you'll see, there are some things that you have to modify yourself at home. You'll see that I had to modify the bottom of the PCV and attach some fittings myself using JB Weld. I had to use a Dremel to hollow out a piece, which is not insanely difficult by any means. If you have the tools, it's actually very simple to do. But I know a lot of you really were like, you know what, I don't mess with any of that. I just want a bolt-on kit. I'll pay extra money to have it to where I can just take my old system out and throw this system in. So in the future, there very well may be a kit that will basically void some parts of this video if you're doing it with the bolt-on kit. So for those of you that don't want to spend the extra money for a full-on kit and you're just getting the throttle body spacer and the plug from MercRacing and you want to do everything yourself and save some money, this will still be a video that you need to watch every step for. So please keep that in mind going forward. Also, the other thing is that my throttle body spacer is the earliest prototype, so it's going to probably look a lot different than what you guys are going to be getting in the future from MercRacing. We identified some issues. We tried to put a water meth injection port on there that just isn't going to work. So my throttle body kit and what I had to do to get it installed on my supercharger will likely be very different from what you get in the years going forward from this job. And it'll likely be a lot easier for you in terms of getting this installed. So please keep that in mind going forward. And if you have any questions about any of this, please leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer everything to the best of my ability. Let's get into the DIY.
The first thing we're going to work on is the spider hose that we're going to be replacing our OEM spider hose with. Now what we have to modify on this is our return line, and this line here is the OEM return line out of the Audi 3.2 PCV. So we need to remove this because we're going to be installing one of our 10AN fittings. It's a 1/2 inch NPT to 10AN fittings. That's going to basically replace that so we can add on any kind of hose we want to the end and route it wherever we want. So the way you do this is really simple, is you're just going to grab this, you're going to pull this piece out, just like that. It's a barbed piece, so it just kind of pushes in there. And this plastic feels really stiff and it's kind of cold here, so I wouldn't, really manhandle this thing. You don't want to crack it, but it is pretty flexible being brand new. If you're worried about this, kind of cracking because it feels stiff to you, you can always heat it up a little bit really carefully with either a heat gun or hair dryer or something, and it should be a little bit easier to move around. But we got that out, and now it's time to install the 10AN fitting. Real quick, we're just going to test fit this 1/2" NPT to 10AN fitting into this to make sure it fits well. And as you can see, it's a nice super flush fit. And honestly, this doesn't have a ton of pressure. You could probably just shove that in there and tape it off really well, but I don't want to put any kind of tape here, especially with the heat of the engine. So we're still going to put some JB Weld in there to make sure this stays put, but it looks really good there. All right, so what we're going to be using to bond everything together when we do this, we're going to be using the JB Weld plastic bonder. It's got a dual plunger here, so it should be very easy to mix. We're going to push that onto the cardboard and use a little mixing stick to get it good and mixed up before we apply it to what we need to. But this is specific for plastic to metal and plastic to plastic bonding. It sets in 15 minutes, and I think it cures in about 30 minutes, but it's a little chilly out, and I just want to be safe, so I'm going to do this today and let it bond overnight so we have no issues. It dries tan, so once it's done, I'm going to wipe off any excess, and then hopefully it won't look too messy, but if it does, I'll probably wrap whatever I have exposed in electrical tape just to clean it up. In order to prep the actual PCV, the pancake PCV, if you will, we have to get this ready for some of the AN fittings as well. So what we have to modify is we need to cut this piece off here, and we're going to cut it kind of right where it meets the lip. You'll see there, I'm kind of resting my Dremel on it. We're going to try and cut it flush with that straight across. I'm using a Dremel with a plastic cutting wheel, specifically made for something like this. Make sure you wear glasses, but I'm going to go ahead and get this cut. Just make sure you try not to damage anything else. I've got this in my vise to hold it steady. It's not in there terribly tight because I obviously don't want to crush this or snap anything. I use the tape to protect the edges. Hopefully that'll hold it well enough for me to do this. Obviously, Dremels kind of make a mess, so I need to go in here and clean up all this plastic here, and I'm going to widen out this hole to get ready for the 10AN fitting. One thing you want to make sure you do after you trim that piece off is you want to clean out your PCV. To remove it, it's just a little bit of tabs that connect to the outside, so you just press those out and pull it apart. It takes about a minute. And then once you're in here, there was a ton of plastic bits from this. I've already kind of dumped out, but I want to show you how easy it was to clean it. The spring just rests there, so you take that off. And then this piece, you just flip it over and it falls out. So you can clean this, you can clean this. I use just a little bit of degreaser, you know, purple power type stuff, and wipe this down after I got all the large chunks, and that way it's just nice and clean, and I don't have any issues with any plastic from that getting caught in here that might, you know, move into the engine or cause this to deteriorate and fail any faster than it actually should. And then once you're done with it, to put it back together, you just set this in there, make sure it's nice and dry. There's a little bit in there, but that'll dry off on its own. You're going to take your spring, you're going to set it back in, and then this will just sit on top, and you just push it closed. Make sure you have all the tabs lined up first. Then make sure all the tabs connect, and it's back together, ready to get modified and put your fitting in. All right, so once we have that piece cut off, and I kind of flattened it as much as I could, it's time to figure out a way to get our AN fitting mounted into it, which isn't going to work, right? There's not enough space there. So what we need to do is, once again, go to our Dremel, get some kind of attachment that you can use to hollow out the inside of this. Okay, and we're going to do it just enough so that we can get this to fit in. And we don't need this to go all the way down, so we don't have to take a ton out. We just want to get, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 threads, something enough that we can get it in there with the JB Weld and get it in there securely attached. So that's what I'm going to start working on. Once again, wear eye protection when you do this. Now, as you do this, you want to make sure you're kind of stopping every once in a while to see how it's fitting. That way you don't do too much, and you don't want to take off too much from the thin side, because there's a thin side and a thick side. So I need to work my way a little bit more into the thick side now. Okay, so I just finished up trimming this piece out and widening it. And a couple things to note. This tool that I got here, this one for my Dremel, this thing's awesome. It's just a straight piece of metal that's got grooves cut into the last end piece here. And what this does is you can take out a lot of plastic if you want to. You just apply a lot of pressure. But if you're really light with it, you can literally just go like this, back and forth. And then you rotate this, go back and forth, and it creates a nice smooth finish on the inside, and it allows you to really control how much plastic you're taking out as you're using this. Now just be really careful. I dropped this at one point, and as you can see in the bottom there, it put a hole on the side. Now, it's not the end of the world here because it's still coming from inside the PCV and out of the exit port here, so it shouldn't matter at all, but I'm still gonna get in there and I'm gonna put a dab of JB Weld on the very inside here to just cover that up. That way I'm not worried about it, and I'll put a little on the back side. In terms of the size of the port here, we widened it up just enough to where I can take our fitting, and as if I was just screwing it in here, and I'm screwing it in probably about 3 or 4 threads deep. And I mean, it's in there tight. That's not going anywhere. I could probably leave it just like that, but just to be safe, when I do the JB Weld, I'll just JB Weld right around the seam here where it connects to the PCV, this bottom plate, and seal it up really good. And we'll be done with that one. And then we can put the other fitting into this one and JB Weld that one. I already showed you the JB Weld that we're going to use, but once again, it's the plastic bonder. It'll dry in a tan color. It's got the dual plungers, so it should mix easily. This one's neat because once we take this cap off, we press a little bit out, we can put the cap on, and it's reusable. I've got the little stick that comes with it to mix, and I can use that to apply the JB Weld. I've also got this tiny little plastic screw thing that I'm not going to use, and I think this will be really good for being able to get some of the JB Weld up and applying it as well. So we remove the cap. We're going to spread out, and we're just going to start with a little bit here. Kind of came out a little uneven. There we go. I'm going to put that cap back on. We're going to go ahead and mix this up really good. It is colder out tonight, so it takes a little bit longer to set than normally. If it's normal temperatures above 40 degrees, this will take 15 minutes to set and then 30 minutes to cure. But if it's colder than 40 degrees, it'll take longer, which it is definitely colder tonight. So I'm gonna get this sealed off as well. And if you wear gloves with this, it'll be kind of cool. I think I can do is I can get this kind of applied, and then I can use my gloves to smooth it out. I'm just going to fill the gap all the way around the fitting here and get it nice and sealed off. And you know, this will be under the engine, so I'm not terribly worried about this looking really pretty. Okay, so we've got the JB Weld applied to that. Now it just needs to rest and cure. I'm gonna let it cure overnight, but it doesn't look terrible. It doesn't look perfectly professional, but all I'm gonna do once it's done and set, I'm gonna wrap it in electrical tape and it'll look perfect. You won't even know at a glance. Only you should know about it. So I'm gonna set this off to the side and we're gonna work on the other piece of the PVC. Okay, so we're gonna do this piece here next. And I'm going to use this stick to apply it, I think. And I'm just going to put a healthy coat all the way around. Using my hand to hold it in place because this doesn't fit in here super firm. So I'm going to have to hold it here until it sets for a bit. Now, if you get any on the threads, you want to make sure you get those off relatively quickly. You don't want this stuff to set on one of the threads. So I'm going to eventually wipe that off here in a bit, just like that. Get it off of there. Okay, so I've got all of the edges of that one filled, as you can see. And I'm going to kind of use this stick to control it from drooping down and getting all over everything. And once again, I don't really care if it looks nice. I'm going to wrap this in electrical tape. I just want to make sure that this seals completely to the PCV. So I'm going to let this set and we'll work on the last one. All right, y'all, we got one more. This last one here. The inside is pretty well set and done. I'm not too worried about that. So I'm going to go ahead and get this in. And this one we're just going to screw in until it can't get screwed in anymore. Okay, so we got both of these in here. It doesn't look pretty, I know, but I don't really care. If you want it to look pretty, just take your time. A Q-tip might work well. Just you might want to make sure you don't get any of the fuzzies in there, but a Q-tip would probably work really well to get this stuff in here. I didn't even think about that. But I've used my gloved finger to really like push this stuff around and to make it sealed down into these threads, as you can see all the way around. Excuse me. Once it actually dries, I'll wrap it all in electrical tape. This piece up here does not fit super tight in there, so you kind of have to hold this one until it sets. And then you want to make sure that there is plenty of the JB Weld in each groove to hold it in there, because it's kind of loose. So I'm just going to hold this one. I actually might just lightly put it up against something to where it's sitting straight up, and that way it will set overnight just fine. Just make sure you don't want to get any of the JB Weld on the actual AN threads, because that's what you're going to be connecting your hoses to. But this is all of the JB welding we're going to have to do. So I'm going to let this dry overnight, and then we'll start to work on installing all of this onto the car. Okay, in preparation for getting the valley pan put into the engine, I want to replace the OEM original oil separator. And it's super simple. If you look here, you can see there's 4 bolts that hold this in. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is what they look like. They do have blue Loctite on them. Let me get this to focus. So yeah, they got blue Loctite on them, but they are T25s, 4 of them. And once you get those removed out, it literally just comes off. There's no gasket or anything like that that goes around the whole thing. You can see it's kind of got some metal washers built in, and that seals it to the actual valley pan here. So I'm going to get some brake clean and clean the interior up as much as I can, but you can see this is just a super simple channel. You can, or you know, valley pan, you can see the channels, and those look nice and clean. But I'm gonna get this cleaned up, and then I've got my replacement. I got a Vico, I think that's which one, what company I got? Yeah, Vico replacement. So not OEM, but Vico makes decent replacement stuff, and this is literally just plastic. So you can see it looks almost exactly the same as the OEM one. So I'm gonna just get this put back in, and then we'll be ready to put the valley pan into the engine. All right, so starting this video, we have our PCV system completely removed, the old OEM one. If you need to know how to do that, once again, check out FCP Euro's video. They've got a great one, and I've got a tips and tricks video you can look up, but just make sure you take your time, go easy. But we've got it down. The first thing we need to do is we need to clean the mating surface of the engine where our gasket's gonna go before we put in the new oil separator and metal valley pan. So I'm gonna go ahead and get some brake clean and some blue towels. I'm gonna go ahead and get this nice and cleaned up. We are done cleaning the surface, the mating surface of the engine there. You can still see some stuff on there, but it's nice and smooth. None of that is like really thick residual stuff. It was there last time I replaced my PCV. So what we got to do first is get our gasket. Remember, we're using a metal gasket now. There's some writing here. Make sure it's face up. We're just going to set this down in here. You also want to make sure that your surface is dry if you use any kind of cleaning materials. But we want to get that lined up with all of the bolt holes there. Okay, before we go to install the valley pan, we got our gasket laid in place. We're going to take out this little kind of fuel valve, this, I think it's a fuel pressure relief valve, whatever. This is what your gas line, your fuel line connects into. So we're going to undo that because we need a little bit more clearance here. We're going to set this aside somewhere very safe so we do not lose it. And after that, we're going to take our new valley pan. This is this is a used one, but I've cleaned it really well. I replaced it with a brand new oil separator here in the bottom. And so I'm going to go ahead and get this lined up. You want to have your exit to the rear of the car. We're going to slowly slide this in, hopefully without issue. There we go. So it kind of moved the gasket around a little bit, so we're going to have to align the gasket, but we got that
set in there. And now we just need to put our new bolts through, and we want to do that very carefully so that we make sure we don't damage the gasket in here. Okay, here are our new bolts. These are 30 millimeter, T30 Torx bolts. Come with blue Loctite. These are a little bit longer than the OEM ones because we have a little bit taller of a system here. So we're going to kind of wiggle this around, maybe play with the gasket a little bit. We're going to try and get one threaded. Once we get one threaded down here, we'll get one threaded up here, and then we should be able to get them all threaded. So I'm going to start working on this, and I'll be right back with you once I have them all threaded through the gasket. All right, all of our bolts are completely secure into the valley pan, but, well, I shouldn't say completely secure. They're all threaded. They're still very loose here. So what we need to do now is go ahead and tighten these down, just hand tight, and make sure you do it evenly. So you want to do it in a star pattern so that this tightens down very evenly onto the gasket. And when you torque them down, I think the torque setting is like 9 foot-pounds or maybe even like 5. It just needs to be nice and snug. Does not need to be super tight, so do not go crazy with it. All right, before we completely torque everything down, everything's just barely hand tight. There's still a little bit of play. Don't forget to remove this plate off of your OEM PCV because that needs to go right here because this is what all your stuff is going to connect to. And so we need to make sure that we get this aligned on here. Now, this isn't going to align perfectly like your old one did, so we're just going to tighten it with these two valley pan bolts. We're going to put it right there. And then after that, it should be good to go because all that does is really brace up the fuel lines. So we're going to get these threaded through. And we're going to hand tighten these, and then we will torque everything down. Okay, so those are barely hand tight. This is still nice and secure. And so now I'm going to start in a star pattern, working with this one and then going across and torquing these down just to get them good and snug, nothing too extreme. All right, we have this completely torqued down. It's good to go. So the next step is going to be putting things back together as if you were buttoning up from your OEM PCV replacement. We're going to get the wiring harnesses for the injectors put back together. We're going to swap out our seals for the injector, make sure we got nice new ones on there. We'll get our coolant pipe back in. Don't forget to replace that gasket. Make sure it's lubed up when you put it in there. And we're going to get this hose connected again. And then once we're done doing all that, it'll be time to attach the new spider hose to the PCV. And I will start filming again when we get to that part. So we are getting to be kind of wrapped up a little bit here in terms of what we're doing down in the engine bay. So you can see that we have the OEM spider hose completely removed. We're not putting that back on because it won't fit into our new valley pan. So we got the replacement spider hose. This is the 3.2 one. This is also the one that we retrofitted the return line with a 1/2 inch MPT to 10AN fitting. And this is going to press into here, and we just need to make sure it maneuvers around a little bit. This is new, so it should flex pretty well. Make sure you put a little bit of oil on the O-ring here, lubricate it. And so we're going to go in here, and never done this, so I'm going to try and figure this out the best I can and get this in here the right way. Might take me a couple tries. Right. Here. Now there's tabs underneath, and you got to make sure those tabs line up with the PCV or the valley pan here. Push it all the way in, make sure it's fully seated and secured. And then this thing here, take it off. We're gonna have to replace that with the one that is on our old spider hose. So we're gonna take this off. Okay, once you get this centerpiece fully seated, and when you do this, you need to get your palm on there and really press in there. It presses in pretty good and deep. Once you do that, you want to take just a little bit of oil, get on your finger just a tiny bit, and we want to lubricate the O-rings that are on our spider hose connections that go into the valve cover gaskets, or in the valve covers, I should say, and go ahead and pop those on. The great thing about these is these should come on and off a lot easier than the OEM ones. So pretty excited about that. Get the O-rings lubricated, and you can pull it and press down on, And we are good to go. All right, so once you've got your spider hose connected and routed correctly, you've got this check valve that comes with it, and we need to just pop that off of the little nipple there. And what you need to do is just pull this check valve out of the hose, and it's a barb fitting. It'll be a little bit tighter than that because I've already removed this. So you want to take that valve out, set the hose aside, and then you need to grab your OEM one, and you need to pull this hose off of this check valve. This is the OEM hose that would go to your OEM PCV. We're going to pull that off, and we're going to replace this line with the new line from the new spider hose. That way it's got the appropriate distance so that you can get everything lined up when you get your supercharger back on, because this hose right here is what connects to your air intake tube. Full disclaimer, getting this line off of the OEM check valve was not super easy. What I ended up doing was just cutting it short, and then I used a razor blade to kind of cut the line down, and I got a pair of needle nose pliers and was able to pull it off after that. So we got that completely off. Okay, so I had issues trying to make either one of these breather lines for the check valve work. This is what comes off of the PCV and then connects to a little check valve that eventually connects to our intake. So this one was the one that came off of our old PCV, and I've already cut it. Like, I pulled it off of that check valve and I tried to cut it to make it work, and it just didn't. It's a hard plastic line, and when you try and manipulate it, even with heat, it just collapses on itself. You can see the little bend there. So this is the one that comes with the new spider hose that fits an OEM 3.2 engine, and it just does not work at all. So what I did was I went to Lowe's, and for $7.99 got a 10-foot roll of 1/4-inch inner diameter fuel line. It's reinforced, it won't collapse on itself, and with a little bit of heat, you can actually get it to bend the way you want, and it'll kind of hold that bend. So you can see the one that I cut on the PCV, well, this is just the valley pan, but you can see it on the breather hose. It connects right there. I use a little bit of heat to create this little bit of a bend here, and it's holding well. I kind of push the line between these two vacuum lines, and then routed it up here. That will be able to come up and connect to my intake just fine. So that was super, super simple to do instead of trying to force one of these two to work. So just go to Lowe's, grab some of that fuel line, or even I think like Advanced Auto or one of your other automotive stores should carry it as well. Before you get everything put back together in the engine bay, while everything's nice and open, go ahead and start taking a look and figuring out how you're gonna route your new lines for your PCV system and figure out exactly where you wanna start mounting things. So there's gonna be two groups of people here. People that don't run a catch can and people that do. So I'm running a catch can, so I'll show you how I do that. But if you're not running a catch can, all you're gonna need are two lines. You're gonna need one coming off of the return line from your spider hose that's connected to the valley pan. And that's gonna have to connect to your PCV. And then from there, you just need to connect a return line from the PCV to the throttle body spacer that we're gonna install onto the supercharger. For me, I'm gonna be running an integrated engineering catch can, so I'm gonna need a third line, and that third line is gonna come from the PCV outlet. It's gonna run to the catch can, and then from the catch can back to the throttle body spacer. So for me, the two spots that I think are the best for everything, because none of this is specifically made to mount perfectly to anything. With the fittings I've got, the best spot for the PCV is gonna be right here on this hard line. It's nice and sturdy, and I'll be able to zip tie that really secure, and then I can maneuver the lines, and I can be able to route the exit line to the catch can along this way and underneath, because I'm mounting my catch can over here, and I'll be able to take the return line off of the valley pan, and I'll be able to connect it back here. So that'll work out well, and then the line from the catch can will go from here and pretty much over top of everything to my throttle body spacer. I'll show you where I'm gonna mount my catch can for a C7. This is for a pre-facelift C7. I do not know if this will work for S4s, SQ5s, facelift C7s, but I'll show you how I'm gonna do it on mine. It'll also depend on what catch can you get and the mounting hardware they send. So that might take some creativity on your end to mount this. All right, so over here, this piece of plastic is part of my headlight mounting system, and there's a T27 screw here, and I've already loosened it up. And you can loosen this up and it won't mess with your headlight at all, and you can pop that out. And for me, with the straight bracket from Integrated Engineering, I can set this down in here. I just gotta maneuver my drain line well. I can set this all the way down into the bottom here and mount it right here to this headlight bracket. I can put the screw right back through it and I'll just get it finger tight because I'm gonna have to maneuver this stuff a little bit. But right here, it's clear of everything. Once I actually tighten it down, it's nice and solid. It's not gonna bounce around, and it's not rubbing up against a lot of other things. And then whenever I need to drain this, it's real simple. I just have to remove this screw. I can pull it up a little bit and access the petcock valve on the bottom to drain the actual catch can. I'm pretty sure I know exactly how I'm gonna route all my lines, so I wanna give you guys a nice tour of it. So coming off of this back here, I'm gonna attach a 90 degree 10AN fitting that's gonna hook to the right here. That will connect to this 90 degree 10AN fitting that is connected to the PCV. From there, I've got that 90 degree fitting that is going to allow the line to come straight underneath this hose right here. And then I'll be able to bend the line and connect it to this straight fitting on the catch can. From there, I've got this 45, which I might leave as it is and then just attach the line and let it come over the top to over here for the throttle body spacer. Or I might kind of rotate and angle this back this way so I can kind of run it around the back of the firewall. But I think that is going to be my best option in terms of routing everything. So that's what I'm gonna get working on. Okay, so the way I measure out the length of the lines that I'm gonna need to make is pretty simple. I put in everything, and I've got this PCV taped here to kind of hold it in place, kind of how I want it to be. And I've got the fittings I'm gonna use in place. I'm gonna measure from the inside of each fitting right up on these flanges from one flange to another, because that's where the hoses are gonna butt up on these fittings. And so that'll be the length. I'm not gonna do an exact measurement because I want there to be a little bit of play because I don't want any of these to have constant tension on anything. So I'm gonna use the tape measure, which by the way, my son thought it'd be a good idea to hide Dad's tape measure before he went to school. So I'm kind of stuck with this thing here. But that is looking right at 11 inches, almost exact, with a slight bend in it. So I'm going to take that, measure the hose, and I'll show you guys how I cut this hose. So we've got our braided hose here, and I've already attached one fitting, a 90 degree, and I got it in there and I got it nice and taped up. And then I measured out 12 inches. Remember, we measured, it was 11 with a little bit of a bend, so I went ahead and did 12 inches just to give me a little bit of wiggle room. And I took some electrical tape here and I wrapped the hose, because when we cut this, the nylon has a tendency to fray. So if you don't, if you're not familiar with this, basically there's rubber fuel line inside with this nylon braiding on the outside. When you cut it, it has a tendency to fray. And there's multiple ways of cutting this. You can use something with like a cutoff wheel, but when you do that, you gotta make sure you get all of the debris from inside the hose out before you use it, or you get a really good pair of shears. These were, I think, like $28 on Amazon, and if you check the description, there's a link to these for the Amazon listing that I bought them from, and they work well. You just got to make sure you get this as straight of a cut as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and get these on here. And it does a very good job of cutting this. And as you can see, the tape helps keep it from fraying even more. Sorry, the camera's kind of wigging out, but so yeah, so now it's time to put the other fitting into this hose, and I'll show you how I do that. All right, in order to get one of these fittings into the line, if you got everything that I got, it's push barbed fittings here, so we're gonna have to push this into the hose. Now, this hose is pretty much, you know, slightly smaller than these barbs, and so it does not go in easily, and I want it that way. I don't want these to ever come off. I want a good seal. So get some kind of a lubricant of some kind. I'm gonna use WD-40 here. This is gonna come in really handy trying to get these things into the lines. So basically, just get it lubed up and start pushing. It'll eventually go on there. It doesn't feel like it'll want to, but just keep working at it and it'll go on there. Okay, eventually after fighting it, you will get it pushed as far forward as you can. There's a little tiny bit of a gap between the end of the hose and the flange, but that's not huge. We're just gonna go ahead and take some electrical tape and tape this off, make it look nice and clean. Push that all down. And our first line is good to go. I'm just going to repeat the process for all the other lines and get them test fitted, and we'll check what it looks like when we're done. We have just finished connecting the return line to the PCV and the PCV to the catch can. The only line that's left to make is the line that goes from the catch can back to the supercharger, which supercharger's not on yet, so I can't make the line. But I want to give you guys a close-up tour of what this looks like. So obviously we have our new valley pan. We've got the new breather hose that comes out to the return line with a 10 AN fitting that we put into it. That's got a 90-degree angle, half-inch MBT to 10 AN fitting. That is going into a roughly 10.5-inch, 11-inch line. I'll have exact measurements in the description below. That's going to a 90-degree fitting going into the PCV. The PCV has 2 zip ties onto this hard line here. It's nice and secure, not going anywhere, not going to rattle around. And that's got a 90-degree fitting coming off the bottom. That is running along the side of the valve cover around the coolant reservoir and into the catch can. The first thing we need to do to our supercharger before we install the spacer or anything else is we need to plug off the OEM return port. So MercRacing cleverly designed this plug here, and it is using, I believe this is the OEM gasket that would be on the OEM return stack. So we're going to take this and we're going to just thread it around the actual plug here. Now once you do that, make sure you have just a little bit of oil handy, because we want to make sure we lubricate this so it doesn't come off of the plug once we do actually get it in there. The other thing I've already done, I've already gone in and I've cleaned inside of this port out so it's nice and clean. But once you have that, you can take this, and he cleverly designed it to have this bolt so you could aid in pushing this all the way down and getting it nice and secure in. And this will also aid in having to remove it if you ever want to remove it. So once it's in, you can remove the bolt. Give it another good press if you want to. But then after that, one very important piece to make sure it does not come out, you got this little, I don't even know what this is called, but you've got this piece that will go into the side of the actual plug, and this will keep it in and not allow it to actually come out at all. This is what kind of secures it into the ports. I suppose I should show you guys how I actually put this in. So it just sits in there. I'm gonna get a little screwdriver and I'm going to just gently press it all the way in. And that literally just wedges the metal between the port and the actual plug to allow it to stay nice and secure and not ever come out. Now it's time to prep the supercharger for the throttle body spacer install. So there's a few things that we have to do. First off, we have to take off the actual throttle body, which if you've never done it before, it's not difficult. It's 4 T30 Torx. You can actually do this on the car, but you got to remove this to do the job, so it's a lot easier to knock it out here. So these are all T30s that are around the throttle body. I've already gotten 2 of them out, gotten the other ones loose. So I'm just gonna pull these out. Now, once you have those loosened up, throttle body comes off. It's one separate piece. This piece will likely come off with it, and this is an OEM throttle body spacer, and we will not be reusing this. This does have a little mount for one of your solenoids on the back that it kind of rests on, but we don't really need it, so it can just hang out in the back there. If it really bothers you, you can always get back there with a small zip tie and secure it to something else in the back, but we're not going to be reusing that. Once you get the throttle body removed, it'll be time to actually install the throttle body spacer and attach your throttle body system. Of course, the throttle body spacer is going to be used as our return port for the PCV system. So the way you attach this will be very dependent on your throttle body system. If you have a OEM throttle body like I do, you're going to use the supplied bolts, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But first I'm going to show you how to install a throttle body spacer if you have an aftermarket throttle body system such as 034, Integrated Engineering, APR, or even the custom system from Josh Marshall. So the first thing you want is to find the stud kit that should be provided if you've purchased this after we've made the revisions. If you're part of the pre-order, then you should have received this stud kit if you responded to the email. If you're buying this in the future, make sure you click this option on MercRacing's website to get the stud kit to go along with the rest of the spacer kit so that you can attach your aftermarket throttle body system. So these just thread into the 4 holes of the mounting points, and I'm only going to do 2 because I'm not going to be using them, and I'm not going to go really crazy tight with them. I'm just doing hand tight, but you can get a pair of channel locks or pliers to tighten them up a little bit more. Once you have those on there, you want to take a screwdriver if you're part of the pre-order. If you're part of the pre-order, you're going to have this water meth port. The future revisions likely will not have the water meth port because it's just not feasible to work with this system. It was an oversight. We thought we could make it work, and it won't. Future ones, this should not be an issue. But if you've got this, you can take a screwdriver and slowly and carefully bend this bracket up just a little bit. Won't hurt anything. You just want to bend it up a little bit to create some space. Take one of the supplied gaskets, thread it over the stud kit, and then you're going to take your spacer and put it on. And then after that, you're going to take whatever cast piece that is supplied with your throttle body kit, and you're going to put that over the studs. Now I'm using Josh Marshall's flange for demonstration purposes only on this, but you're going to put that on there, and then there will be supplied flange nuts that you will screw on here, okay? Now, if you're actually running Josh Marshall's kit, he'll have specialty bolts and a whole different system, and he can be able to walk you through on how to actually install that. But if you guys have 034 APR or integrated engineering, I want you guys to just imagine this being the bottom of the cast piece that is supplied with your kit. Once you get to this point, you're just going to take the flange nuts provided, and you're going to put those over and secure it to the actual spacer and to the car. After you have those secured down, you would just attach your throttle body to your cast piece as normal, like you would if this was mated to your supercharger without the spacer. So no big difference there. For those of you that are running the OEM throttle body with the pre-order throttle body spacer, this process is a little bit more difficult, a little bit more cumbersome. Unfortunately, it's not going to fit as perfectly as it would if you had an aftermarket throttle body system. So future revisions will not have this issue for anybody curious. So if you're ordering this in the future, this should not be a problem. But for those of you with an OEM throttle body, the first thing you need to do is pop off this solenoid from this bracket, and then maybe take a pair of pliers and bend this bracket in a little bit, because you're going to run this solenoid onto the outside of it, okay? And it's fine, it's not going to break anything, it's just going to sit right there. Because what we have to do on this one, instead of running the return port off to the side here, we're going to have to run it to the top, because there's not enough clearance with the return port here between that and the motor body of the throttle body to be able to get your return line onto here. So we got to run it just a little bit differently. So once you have this out of the way and you're ready to install everything, the best way to do it is to take your throttle body and get a couple of your bolts threaded through the bottom, and I just kind of hold it here on the bottom like this. I'm going to do 2 at a time, 1 on each side. We're going to take one of the supplied gaskets, put it on here. After that, we will attach the throttle body spacer, and I'm going to make sure that I've got this aligned correctly before I attach this. All right, so we're going to put that on here. And then you're going to put on the other gasket. And then once you have all that completely put together, kind of line up 2 of the bolt holes, push everything together, and just get a couple of these threaded so that nothing moves. And then once you have those started, you can get the other 2 bolts supplied by MercRacing started, and you can tighten them down. You're going to torque these just like you would if you were torquing the throttle body to the supercharger. I forget the exact torque value, but once again, it's not crazy strong. So, you know, maybe I think like 9 foot-pounds, something like that. Just, you know, good and secure. So I'm going to get this all tightened down and secured, and I'll show you how everything looks from different angles. Okay, I just got everything torqued back on there, and it's nice and secure. I want to give a walk around and talk about what it looks like with the OEM throttle body setup. So coming off the side of the throttle body, or I'm sorry, the side of the supercharger, doesn't look really much different. You come around to the side here, and you can start to see the spacer. Let me show you why the water meth bung is going to get deleted. We tried to make it work, and it's just not feasible, especially on an OEM setup. You can see how it tucks behind there after I had to shave it down. So future revisions will not have it. Plus, not many people are running water meth on an OEM throttle body setup, and You know, when you have an aftermarket throttle body, you can just tap in something on that cast piece. But throttle body here, spacer, you can see why we had to align it up and we had to move the solenoid out of the way to allow room for the return line. Hopefully future revisions will all be built to where they all come out of the back, even for OEM throttle body setups. We're hoping to make this maybe just a little bit wider so that we have room to do that. This is just for the pre-order prototypes. We're gonna have to leave this here. Once I get a line on it, I'll mess around with this and see if there's a better way. But for now, you know, that's secure. It's not going anywhere. It's not really putting any undue stress on this line. So yeah, in any case, it's good to go. It's gonna work just fine. Obviously, aftermarket throttle body people have it a little bit easier and it'll work a little bit better. The other issue with doing it this way is there's a chance that the engine cover for the rear of the supercharger might not be able to sit down over all of this. So if that's an inconvenience, I am sorry. You can always get a revised throttle body spacer when those are available for purchase. But yeah, now it's about time to start wrapping things up and getting everything put back onto the car. Something to point out when you're starting to put things back together, obviously you have your valley pan in here and it sits a little bit higher. So this bracket that you relocated from your old PCV to this one, it sits up higher. That's gonna cause your fuel rail to not sit perfectly in here. First thing I would say is to take this bracket and bend it down as low as you can towards the valley pan. I used a pair of pliers and just kind of pushed on it. So when you go to put this in, be really careful of your valves. Don't twist anything. Don't twist a line. That's what caused me to delay getting this put back together. I had to wait for this to get shipped to me because one of my lines got pinched here. And just go really easy when you set it in here. I could get every one of them back in. When I'm talking about these screws here, except for this one. This one just will not go to this one. So I'm just gonna kind of let it hang out here. It's not gonna do any harm sitting around here. Hopefully I won't hear it buzz around. If I do, the next time I take off my supercharger, I'll just clip it off, or I actually might take it off here before I button this all up. That's probably what I'll do. But just take your time, go very easy. Do not damage this fuel line. If you do, you'll be in a bad way. Get everything plugged up and secured. According to the FCP Euro video, they've got all the details on the torque specs for that. And then make sure once you have everything completely secure for your fuel system, before you put everything back together, you open the door to your car and make sure you prime the fuel system to check for leaks. Everything is put back together other than the intake. So right now I just want to run through and show you how everything looks. The line that goes from the catch can for my setup to the throttle body spacer is approximately 31.5 inches, and I'll have all the lengths in the description, but it's about 31 inches. And remember, I've got an OEM throttle body, so let me point out a few things here. The return port is facing to the top, so if you want to say like 12 o'clock position, so to speak, and I had to move this solenoid around and bend this bracket out just a little bit to get this to fit correctly. It's always an option if you wanted to cut this hard plastic line off of this fitting and off of this solenoid and run a little bit less stiff rubber hose. You could absolutely do that if you really wanted to, but this works. For those of you that have an aftermarket throttle body that comes out a little bit further, you can absolutely take that throttle body spacer and rotate it this way to where the port comes out on the backside. If you do that though with the pre-order throttle body spacer, it's going to be difficult to attach this line from behind here, especially if you have like a S4 that might be a little less room back here. It's going to be really hard to push that line on there, so you might want to consider attaching the line to the throttle body spacer before you set your supercharger onto the vehicle. And for the pre-order spacers, this line literally just pushes down onto the throttle body spacer. There's no AN fitting or anything like that. I just taped the end of it, put it on there, and I put a little clamp around it to make sure it holds on there, but it seemed pretty steady otherwise. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the car put back together, top off the supercharger with fluid, and give the car a start and make sure everything is running correctly. Okay, I hope you can hear me all right over the engine running. I want to point something out. There was a noise right on startup that sounded kind of like a whistling noise, and I want to show you guys what it is so that you understand it's normal. So that sound is coming from the back of the PCV, this little spot right here. That is an opening, and if you put your finger here, you can actually feel air coming out. As the PCV is pumping, it's pushing air out of here. It's made to vent, and so that's making that sound. So that is completely normal. Okay everyone, I want to show you just how simple it's going to be to replace your PCV if the diaphragm breaks. All you're going to have to do is come in here, pop up a couple of these tabs and get it started, and then it pops right off. After that, you can swap out your broken diaphragm, put it back in, then realign it with the tabs, press it back down, make sure all the tabs are nice and secure, and that's it. So that was what, less than 60 seconds to replace a diaphragm if I needed to. And you can also redirect that little vent I showed you to aim any way you want to if you have a preference. Okay everyone, that wraps up the video. I hope it was easy to follow along. I hope that it gives you guys confidence to go out and do this job yourself. If you've done a PCV change on one of these supercharged engines, then you should absolutely be able to do this no problem. For those of you that are doing the full-on customization route, and what I'm talking about there is modifying that PCV, this piece here, and doing all that, it's not as daunting as it seems. It's actually pretty simple. Just take your time, go slow, be easy, and you'll knock it out. If you're watching this video like a year after it's been posted, check the comments below. Any major updates to this since I have done it will be in that pinned comment. Read through the description of the video very, very carefully, as I will have tons of information about this. There'll be a link to the PCV Relocation series. That's gonna be all the videos I ever do on this. They'll be in one playlist. There'll be a link to the Facebook group that we created that's dedicated to this job, where I'm hoping that facilitates a lot of discussion amongst you once you all start doing this job. If you guys notice anything that could be done better, let me know. Either put in a comment, shoot me a DM on Facebook, shoot me a DM on Instagram, something like that. All the tools, everything that I use to do this, all the specialty tools will all be there in the comments below, or I'm sorry, in the description of the video. And yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I'm really, really happy with this, and I can't wait to see how it works out in the long run. But so far, it's working flawlessly. I don't even have a check engine light for PCV, no, nothing. So really, really happy. One last big shout out to all of you who donated and bought parts and contributed to this to make this project happen. Could not have done it without you guys. So this is almost exactly a year to the date from the first day that I saw one of these in person to us getting this completed. And I'm super proud of this project, but seriously, thank you to all of you. Couldn't have done it without you guys. If you have any comments or questions, leave them below, and we'll see you guys on the next Audi C7 Owners DIY.